Welcome to In Their 20s, a podcast for people in their 20s. Today we spoke with Jason Calacanis, who is an entrepreneur, angel investor, author, and podcaster who turned $100,000 into $100 million when he was one of the first investors in Uber. So let's jump into our interview with Jason Calacanis to hear all about his 20s and how he turned $100,000 into $100 million.
Get started.
Awesome, Jason. I don't know how much you know about my podcast, but it's called In Their 20s.
Yeah.
For the past year, I've been interviewing influential business leaders, celebrities, and all-star athletes to talk about their 20s. Just want to provide the best advice to people.
Great.
And I've been following your story for a long time now, really in awe with everything you've been able to accomplish. So, of course, we're going to extract some really good advice from this interview.
Okay. Sounds good.
Awesome. So, Jason, I understand back in the 90s, you began your career as a reporter covering the internet industry in New York.
Yeah.
You were an editor for the Silicon Alley Reporter, which
Yeah.
sold to Dow Jones in 2003, and editor of the Digital Coast Reporter. There was an interesting quote I saw a while back that you shared. It was, being a journalist is a great way to learn how to interview founders and cut through BS. So I'd love to hear just about your experiences as a reporter and an editor and what you gained during these years.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. What a great idea for a podcast, by the way. I wish this podcast existed when I was in my 20s, because when I was in my 20s, going to school at night at Fordham, I was trying to figure out how wealth is created and how people became powerful. And the best I could figure it out was magazines, uh, because I would, at that time, pre the internet and the World Wide Web existing, magazines and something called zines, which were kind of like indie magazines that you would photocopy, were all the rage. And you would go to Tower Records on Lower Broadway in Manhattan, and there would be all the magazines, but then there would be a zine section. And there were all these weird magazines that were printed up on photocopy paper or something similar. And these were a way for people who didn't have a voice and didn't have anybody paying attention to them to get attention. So I had actually done a magazine called Cyber Surfer first, before Silicon Alley Reporter, with a publisher called Starlog. And I wound up getting in a big legal battle with them because we had no contract. I owned the trademark and they had paid to print the magazine. That magazine lasted 5 issues. And you can actually see it in the Wayback Machine. I guess somebody sent the old archive there, which was kind of cool for me to see. And that's how I cut my teeth on publishing. And I started my own magazine. It was a photocopy. It was very meager. It was literally a 16-page tabloid, where it was 8 pieces of tabloid paper, which are 2 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. And then you would fold them and put what's called a saddle stitch in the middle of them. And I just started it. I didn't know how a magazine worked. So a guy named David Hershkovitz was doing a magazine called Paper Magazine in New York, which was very, very hot. And it had gone from a zine into a glossy magazine with the top advertisers in the world, whether it was Absolute Vodka buying the back cover or Mercedes and everybody in between. And so I was a columnist first for Paper Magazine. And the publisher, David Hershkovitz, taught me how to do publishing. And then another person, Carol Martesco, had picked up Silicon Alley Reporter, and he was doing a magazine called Res and Film Threat and some other magazines. And he taught me, IndieWire, and he taught me how to do magazine publishing. So I got some great mentors early on who taught me how to do some of these things. And to your point, when you're a journalist, you ask questions, and a lot of times the person on the other side of the table has been media trained, or they have an agenda, at least back in those days before the subjects had the ability to publish themselves, like Elon having his own Twitter handle, or, Chamath having the All In podcast with me, or Sachs. They can talk directly to their audience. Back then, you had to go through journalists. And so there was this really weird dynamic where they would be media trained. They would be trying to spin the story. PR people would be calling you, and you would be trying to sort out the truth as best you could without starting a war with the company that you were covering. And it was a great, great way for me to ask questions 3 or 4 times to try to get to an answer, and then to figure out if the person was telling the truth or not. And then when I became an investor in my third act, in my 40s, double my 20s, I carried that with me. And in the interim, I had, in my 30s, played a lot of poker. And so I learned how to read people. And so I can really tell when people are lying, or what they're thinking, or their motivation, probably a lot better than I could in my 20s, but it was really a great skill to pick up. Because now when I'm investing in somebody, I can tell if they actually care about what they're working on, maybe even better than they can.
Wow.
And that's super important because number one reason companies die is not because they run out of money or because their product is good or bad. It's because the founder gives up.
A lot of cool things I want to extract there just for our
Yeah.
viewers. I love hearing about the evolution of press over time. You're right. I mean, with a handle like yours, for example, or Elon's or even Shamat's, I mean, a lot of these, high profile people no longer have to really go to press. I mean, they can communicate
They
direct.
have a bigger platform, in fact, than
Exactly.
the press who are covering them. And the press know that. And then the press are subject to what's called access journalism, which is to get access to Steve Jobs in the early days.
Mhm.
He would give access to people he felt were fair to his products, or perhaps even on a cynical basis, really good to his products, and who wrote what he generally wanted to write. So he could show up at your conference, let's say Walt Mossberg's conference. Walt is a high integrity guy. Steve Jobs is not going to pull anything over on Walt Mossberg, of course not. But he did get as good of a hearing as possible. And then for Walt Mossberg to get Bill Gates and Steve Jobs to come to his conference, the D conference back in the day, it was a very big deal. And so access journalism is something that Steve Jobs pioneered, and now I think Zuckerberg's really good at. You can see there are like 3 or 4 journalists who Zuckerberg will do interviews with on the regular, and they typically are weak journalists who won't ask him tough questions, right?
Because we want the tough answers that he won't answer. So
Exactly.
yeah.
So it's a the press is I call this late stage journalism. This this very strange area we're in right now, and
Mhm.
it's really a creative destruction of the entire ecosystem that will result in a new ecosystem emerging, and that's what we're seeing. Where you know the subjects or independent journalists without a brand behind them, can actually get more audience or an equal audience to having a brand behind them. So somebody like the newsletter Stratechery or
Mhm.
Stratechery is how you pronounce it. Ben Thompson's, he's got large number of people reading that, or my podcast have a large number of people listening to them, and so we can. I get more people watching me on my 2 podcasts than I do when I'm on CNBC. I still do CNBC. I enjoy doing it, but I don't do it because I have to. I do it because I like it, right? So it's very interesting how it's evolved.
Of course. So looking at the next big venture that you were a part of, so this is a company that you were the co-founder of. This was a blog network that published content on a variety of subjects, including tech news, video games, pop culture, a lot of very interesting subjects. Angel investor behind this one of them was Mark Cuban, and of
The
course,
only one.
oh, he was the only as well,
Yeah.
which was really cool to hear about. And then also, of course, read that you sold this for 25 to $30 million.
Yeah.
Would love to just learn more about the process, because this was, of course, one of your biggest and first biggest experiences being a co-founder. Would just love to hear about what you learned during this time.
Um, it it was very interesting. The sale of Silicon Valley Reporter was a fire sale. I got 2 years salary after having been offered $20 million for it in the dotcom boom. So that was a pretty bitter pill to swallow. Go from 20 million to maybe $400,000 or $500,000 in salary and signing bonuses. Literally sold for a fraction of what I could have sold it for. Big hard lesson. And when I started Weblogs Inc., 18 months into it, AOL wanted to buy it. And I said, I don't want to do what I did the last time, which is hold out for too long and not get cashed up. And so I was determined to get cashed up. And we took the early sale, and that made me dangerous, because when you get that first, 5 or 10 million in your bank account, you're dangerous. You don't have to answer to anybody. I think 10 million is when you get to the FU money. And you really, I mean, even if you have, 3 or 4 million, I mean, nobody can tell you got to show up for work. You don't. You could just, go skiing or surfboard, or go surfing or whatever you want to do. So I think it's very important to get that win under your belt. And I just wanted to take that early win. And it was a very smart move, because then it set me up for, doing the next couple of ventures and eventually becoming a Sequoia scout and investing with the top venture capital firm in the world. So it's I took a very winding road, but there was some intentionality there and a lot of hard fought lessons.
Of course. And through Sequoia as well, I understand you had an opportunity to enter the investment cycle for Uber, one of their first, when a lot of people were saying that this was not a good idea. And a lot of people probably now really upset that they did not get into that. Would love to hear, how you had an opportunity to get connected with Travis, founder of Uber, and their team.
Yeah. So I had known Travis because he had spoken at my events when I was a journalist.
Mm.
Speaking of access journalism. So I'd interviewed him before. We maintained a friendship. He had done two other companies, Scour and Red Swoosh. And then on his third company, he was doing this Uber taxi. Happened to run into him at the Embarcadero outside of a bar. And he said, "Can I show you what I'm doing?" I said, "Oh, is it the cab thing?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Can I invest?" He said, "Sure, but can I show it to you?" I was like, "Yeah, but you got to promise me I can invest." He said, "Okay." And so then I introduced him to 23 other people, of which three of us invested. And the other 19, 20 people, every time I see them, go, "Oh, what a mistake." Because it was a $5 million company at the time. Now it's a $110 billion company. So it
Jeez.
was a hard fought lesson for some people. And yeah, I got lucky again. And it was luck based on having put in all those years of just hard working as a journalist. So I interviewed thousands of people over that time period, and did hundreds of issues of the magazines and dozens of conferences. But one of them wound up with this opportunity, and so you just keep building and building. And I was always of the mindset, you're either creating or you're waiting, and I always wanted to create, and so I just kept creating stuff. And it's very charming to have a young person interview me about my career, because for all these little waypoints that you're able to find on Wikipedia or somewhere on the internet or in my book, there are 20 projects for every project you bring up that I can't even remember I did. And when you look back on your career, I'm 50 now. It's just really weird to, because I still remember being 25 and, running the magazine. Is really strange, because what you'll find in your career is people remember you for the last thing you did. If you're Quentin Tarantino, they remember, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even remember Django or, Jackie Brown or Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs. They just kind of get forgotten, and everybody just talks about the latest thing. And so it's a very interesting thing. When you're in it, you feel like this is the only thing you'll ever do. This is the most important thing you've ever done. And then over time, you start to realize, if you are a true creator, true entrepreneur, you're going to just keep creating stuff over a lifetime. Most of it will not work. And you only need one hit to make a career. You
I,
only need to be right once.
I just watched a video of Mark Cuban saying that as well.
He's the one who taught it to me. He was on his second or third company
Awesome.
with broadcast.com, and he's the one who taught it to me. And, I took that early win with Weblogs Inc. And then, I've gotten lucky, as I like to tell my haters, my jaders on Instagram and Twitter. Listen, I agree. I've gotten lucky 12 times.
So, Jason, then I would love to just further extract a lot of your principles. Looking back at a few things that you've said, I mean, you seem to only make mistakes once because you want to learn from mistakes, and then, of course, not make the same mistake again.
Try not to. Yeah.
Love your focus on creating opportunity. You've spoken about networking as well. I think that's really important. Just diving deeper, what are some daily routines that you developed in your 20s that you still would say you use today?
I'm a voracious reader and networker. Both of those things I do at I think the word is preternatural level, like an almost inhuman ability to network
Wow.
and consume information. And that is not the only path to success. That just happens to be my superpower. And so I would, very early in my career, be the person who invited people to go out. And I didn't have a lot of money. And as an example, I wanted to throw a party for the first or second issue of Silicon Valley Reporter. I went to my friend, Nicholas Butterworth, who was running a company, SonicNet, and I knew he had a new office space, but it was only half filled. So I knew we could have a party there. So I said, "Hey, would you do this party with me for the magazine?" He said, "Sure." I said, "Will you buy the beer?" He's like, "Well, I'll buy some beer." And I was like, "Okay, and we'll do it in your space, and it'll be SonicNet and Silicon Valley Reporter." And he was like, "Great." We did it, and tons of people showed up, and then we ran out of beer. And I said, "Hey, we need more beer." And he's like, "Okay, let's go." And we went to the ATM. We got $200 out each, $300 out each, and we bought cases and cases of beer and carried them back. And then I realized, wow, when you throw the party, everybody wants to meet the guy or the gal or the individual who is running the party. And that really stuck with me. So then when I would go to conferences, I had no money, but I would get a table for 8 at a Mexican joint or a sushi place that was reasonably priced. And instead of putting out the menus, I would go to the maitre d' or the waiter and say, listen, I'm going to just order ahead because people want to talk and I don't want to waste their time. So don't bring the menus out. Just bring like 3 pitchers of beer or sangria or whatever they had, margaritas, and put out quesadillas and chips and guac and all this stuff. And I would just order whatever the cheapest stuff on the menu was and just have it all on the table. And then I would try to find somebody more important than me, invite them to dinner. Then I'd say, hey, anybody else you want to bring? And then they'd bring one person. Then I'd find a couple of people and I'd use their name to get the next group of people to come to the dinner.
Wow.
And eventually, back then I couldn't afford to host a dinner, but it would be $500. And I'd be like, all right, I'll put it on my credit card. I'll pay it back. But that's how I became a hyper networker and started. And the New Yorker wrote a piece about me. I think in 99 or 2000, and it's in a book that they did about the Gilded Age, this, boom town of the dotcom era in the 90s, which was really an amazing moment in time, I'll be honest. And in that piece, I met the writer, Larissa McFark, at a cafe in Chelsea, and she brought her friend with him. He was a really odd, skinny guy with a little bit of a high-pitched kind of voice, and he was very like jittery. And he said, Jason, you know what you are? You're like the Dunbar number. Like there are people who know many more people than other people, and you're like a connector. Larissa, you should call this piece the Connector. And that's what they named the piece. And that individual is Malcolm Gladwell.
Wow.
He was a young writer. He hadn't written any books yet. He hadn't written The Tipping Point. But in The Tipping Point, he talks about the Connector. And he talks about this concept of there are some people, if you say, tell me all the people you know named, Jim, or Susan. Some people know 2 people, but some people can rattle off 20 people they know. And they just said there are some people who are just more natural networkers. And that's what I've done as a career, is just have this really great networking ability. And then I just interviewing people for a living, whether it was as a journalist, a podcaster, or as an investor, you get really smart because you ask a question and then you open up your ears really big and you just listen. And boy, do you get smart real fast by asking very basic questions. People want to educate you, right? So you're asking me questions now. I'm telling you things. And so you've done how many episodes of this?
This is going to be 41, actually, posting Monday.
Perfect. Great. Check back with me when you're at 200. That's when it will get interesting. And the question is, will you quit before you hit 200? Probably. Most people do. They quit before they hit 100. Most of the magic happens when you get to having done something hundreds of times, hundreds of investments, hundreds of podcasts, hundreds of blog posts, hundreds of pages of writing, not hundreds of books, but I suppose, maybe after 10 books, you'd get good at it too. So, or in Tarantino's case, 9, 10 movies. So I really think repetition and sticking with stuff is another thing, being dogged and really pushing that rock up the hill. Hard work pays off. I know your generation hates this idea of hard work, and there's a lot of snowflakes and people want balance. That's all bullshit, to be candid. You can bleep it out if you want, but it's utter nonsense. There's a direct correlation between how hard you work and how many hours you work and how successful you are. You'll get rich people who say, oh, I didn't have to work so hard, but they did. Because the thing is, when you're working hard, you don't actually know which parts of the hard work are going to pay off. I didn't know in my early days that the networking and hosting the parties was such a magnifier. Just like maybe right now, I don't know that hosting the podcast is a huge magnifier for me. Who knows what's of the work I do is the most important. But the truth is, hard work is a benefit in and of itself, because you work that hard, you get really good at it. And you're 20 something years old. How old are you?
23.
You're 23, you have 41 podcasts under your belt. You're going to get to 200 or 300 by the time you're 25. You do it once a week. And, now you're walking into Sirius XM or Spotify and, you're thinking about getting a job at those places. And you're like, yeah, I've done 200 podcasts. And they're like, okay, here's a big bag of cash and a bunch of responsibility because you did shit without having to be asked to do it. So congratulations on taking action and creating, not waiting.
Jason, thank you so much. It means a lot. That was all really awesome to hear and really appreciate that.
That's my pleasure.
So my final question for you, of course, during the dot-com boom, you found a lot of your early success there. I would just love to hear, if you were 20 years old now, or in your 20s now, which industries would you be looking at? I know everybody is talking about crypto. A lot of people are talking about a lot of these new booming markets that are coming on the scene. But if you were in your 20s right now, where would you put most of your focus?
Yeah, I put most of my focus on building my skills and having a really tight skill stack, and learning how to learn and be disciplined, and networking really well. And I would be sector agnostic, which is to say, you know, a lot of the great sectors, you don't know they're going to be great sectors until they emerge. So following your passion, you know, that's a pretty dangerous piece of advice because, you know, there may not be a business in what you're passionate about. If your passion is poetry or magazines, you know, when I was a kid coming up in my 20s, going into magazines was a brilliant idea. They were booming, they were printing money, there was investment in that. Going into magazines now or newspapers is a stupid idea. They're dying. So you definitely don't want to get, you know, a job working on the Titanic, you know, the morning of the day it crashed. Like that would suck because there's no way for you to succeed because this ship is going down. That would be like working at a newspaper today or a magazine. In all likelihood, it's going to fail or it's not going to grow, and you're going to lose your job with it. So you definitely want to go where the tide is rising. That is very helpful. But you don't have control over which one of those. So being flexible enough to switch between things and then saying yes to opportunities, even if there's no money involved, is really, really valuable. Because somebody had told me, hey, this company Starlog wants to do a magazine about, you know, video games or something. And then and somebody had told me they were looking to do that. And I went there and pitched them. I don't even remember who told me. And I pitched them on my idea for Cyber Surfer. And I just said yes. And they said, how much do you need to make the magazine? I said, $5,000. And they were like, okay, we'll give you $5,000 to make the magazine. And then they would sell it and make $25,000 in sales on the newsstand. But I got a $5,000 check for each issue. And I was able to hire a bunch of my friends to write a magazine when I was 22 years old or something. So you got to say yes to opportunities. You got to have great skills. You got to be hardworking, work 6 days a week, work 7 days a week. This whole idea of work-life balance, you know, it's kind of nonsense. If you're on vacation, sure, you can go on vacation, but would it kill you to read a business book while you're on vacation? Would it kill you to check your email or do a little something self-improvement or listen to an audiobook while you're going on your hike? Probably not. So, you know, there's value in sleeping well. There's value in, you know, having work-life balance or spending time with your kids. But when you're young and you're in your 20s, man, that's a time to put in 60, 70, 80 hours a week and look at the person on your left, look at the person on your right, whatever time they come in on the left, come in an hour before them, and whatever time the person on your right leaves, stay an hour after them. You'll succeed. It's really that simple. And it's really, I guess, not politically correct to say that hustle wins and everybody wants to point to other people and other forces stopping you. But who can stop you from doing this podcast? You is the answer. There's literally Landon can stop Landon and nobody else can stop Landon. Only you can decide to stop doing this. Only you can decide, oh, I emailed 20 important people and only Jason responded. Only you can give up. And you know what? Your generation and the millennial generation, Gen Z and millennials, a lot of them have been, I think, trained to be soft and been given bad advice by their parents and communities, which is, you know, it's all going to work out and everybody's a winner and it's not zero sum and it's blue ocean, blue sky. Everybody gets an opportunity and you'll figure it out. No, get to work hard, you know, put in the time. And, you know, if you go to your boss and say, hey, you know, I did everything you asked. Is there anything I can do over the weekend to help? You will become the number one star in your company. But if I were to say that on Twitter right now, here's my advice to you, and I'll do this as a test. I will tweet after I get off this call. Here's something you can do as a young person. Ask your boss what you can do this weekend to help the company. And I will get flamed 50 different ways about why you should do unpaid labor and are you getting overtime or whatever. It's all nonsense. If you want to succeed, put the time in. If you're a Navy SEAL, if you're an Olympic athlete, if you're an NBA player, Kobe Bryant would get off the plane and not go to the hotel when he landed in another city. He would have the head team for his team, for the Lakers, find a gym. And whether he got off the plane at 4 p.m. or 2 a.m, he would go to the gym and shoot baskets and get better at his game. And that's why he's the GOAT. And that's why he's Mount Rushmore. And that's why he has all those rings. is because he had a work ethic that was just harder than everybody else's. So
100%.
hard work pays off. I know people told you the opposite, but hard work pays off.
No, I believe you. And no, I've been doing that too. And when I do hit episode 200, I will send you an email. I mean, I really
Perfect. I'll retweet you. I'll retweet you.
I appreciate it.
Send me your 100th and 200th. All right, brother.
Jason,
great to meet you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Stay
really
in touch.
appreciate it.
All right. Good
Enjoy your week.
Cheers
Bye.
now. Bye.